Brenna's just going to quickly go over what the rules are for 501c3s and participating in activities around elections. So Brenna, I will turn it over to you.
Great, thanks April. So one of the misnomers that I hear often is that as a 501c3, we cannot do advocacy, we cannot lobby, and we certainly can't get involved in elections. And I'm here to tell you, although I am not a tax lawyer, that is simply not true. 501c3s can and are encouraged to lobby, and they are encouraged to be part of the election process. I do want to state up front that if your organization or the organizations that are part of your group, network, alliance, coalition, have never participated in the political process, meaning they have never spoken to a legislator, they've never talked to their members about issues directly involving them, if you've never spent time educating legislators on your issues, election season is not the time to get started on that. So wait until after the election is over and then begin that process in whichever way you feel most comfortable. But if you have been doing all of those things, if you have been spending time educating your members and you have met with legislators and you have given awards and other things, then please feel free to also get involved in elections. There are a myriad of things that 501c3s are able to do, including holding your elected officials accountable. So the only major thing that you cannot do in any way, shape, or form is endorse a candidate or a political party or in any way, shape, or form influence election results. So keep that in mind as we go through this presentation. You can, however, use your platform to educate members on issues important to you through forums and candidate questionnaires. And you can be part of the voter registration, get out the vote, which April is going to talk about here after me. So let's touch on forums first. Forums are a great way, even in the virtual space, to let people know about your issues and invite candidates to be part of that conversation. Again, going back to the disclaimer that I had at the very beginning of you cannot in any way, shape, or form influence an election or endorse a candidate. Keep in mind that best management practices related to forums are as follows. Make sure that you invite all of the candidates. Now, some organizations or some states, even depending on your election, have 18 candidates, some of them polling under certain percentage points. If you state up front what the minimum percentage points that a candidate must be tracking in order to participate, that's one thing. But as long as you're not making that percentage so that no other party other than a Democrat or a Republican can participate, you should be good to go there. You want to make sure that you educate your members on candidates' views. So you're not asking yes or no questions, you're asking open-ended questions. All of the candidates that are attending the forum get the same amount of time to answer those questions. And if you do allow rebuttal time, every candidate has the same amount of rebuttal time. You can't host a forum in a specific district. If you're looking to engage a specific audience and you want to host that forum in that audience's community center, but you have never had a relationship with that community, you've never been involved in that district before, that would be something that the IRS and the public would get a little queasy about. So I would think about that. You want to make your forums broad. So often we are one issue or one major issue organizations, clean water. You don't want to have a forum just on a single issue such as clean water. Make it more broad if possible. So bring in other partners that you can work with. We did a forum in my previous employment that focused on public health, transportation, and the environment. So it was a much broader forum. They all kind of touched on very similar issues, but it wasn't a single issue forum. The second thing, candidate questionnaires. Candidate questionnaires are not the same thing as a scorecard or a report card. So FYI, questionnaires are things that you put together that you send to candidates running for office asking for their views on the issues. Again, questionnaires must be mailed to all candidates that meet that threshold, and all candidates must have the same amount of time to respond. You have to publish the answers verbatim. They spelled something wrong, they put a comma in the wrong place, doesn't matter, needs to be published the way that they submitted it. A way around that is also to just say you invited this candidate to participate and they declined. That also gets a little tricky if all the Republicans, for instance, declined to participate, but all the Democrats decided that they would. That gets a little tricky, so that is something else that you should look into. Similar to the forums, you want this to be a broad questionnaire around a lot of issues impacting your community. This is a great place to involve your partnering organizations, community organizations, and others to make your questionnaire as broad as possible. Again, you cannot have campaign materials as part of your questionnaire. So when you publish it, you can't have a candidate's ad running on your website or a vote for whoever in the publication. This is a great way to engage your members by asking them to come up with the questions. That's a wonderful way to see what your community is, what's top of mind for them in this election, and a great way to tell them about the advocacy work that you do. And then finally, the voter registration, get out the vote. This is a great one for 501c3 organizations. You are able to register voters provided that the voter registration activities are conducted in a nonpartisan manner. Again, you can't have candidates running for office at your get out the vote event. You cannot go into a community working to get out the vote in a community or a district you have never worked in before. That's also not a best management practice that we would recommend. You don't want to oppose the election of any specific candidate. And with all of these things, in addition to the federal IRS regulations, each state also might have guiding regulations and rules around what election activities 501c3s can get into, especially when it comes to get out the vote. So I would encourage you to look up your state's regulations in addition to the 501c3 IRS designation. So I know April is going to give, that was a very quick introduction to what 501c3s can do during an election. And I know April's going to do a deeper dive into get out the vote registration. Take it away, April.
Yeah, do you want to just go to the next slide and show folks the resources from Boulder Advocacy?
Yes, thank you, April. And FYI, we are going to provide links to all of these resources and toolkits and other things that we mention with the recording of this presentation. So if you don't get them all on this slide, don't worry about it. Boulder Advocacy, which is an initiative of Alliance for Justice, is a fabulous resource for 501c3s in the advocacy space, the lobbying space, and elections. So I would strongly encourage you to check out their website and their resources. Thank you, April, for the reminder there.
Yeah, thanks, Brenna. That was a really good overview. And if you could move to the next slide, please. And Carla, let's check your mic again really quick and see if we're able to hear you now.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
All good. Great. Yeah, so one of the things that we wanted to do on the call today is just have a discussion about get out the vote. And I'd love to hear from those of you on the call to hear what activities you have planned. But we know that this is an important election year. It's a presidential election year, but we also know that because of COVID-19, that this election year is going to be unlike any that we've ever experienced. In typical years, many NGOs work to make sure that their audiences are motivated to vote, are registered to vote, that they know where to go and vote and how the process of voting. And now with COVID-19, there's also a new important role that NGOs can play, which is making sure our audiences know how to vote by mail. So we wanted to be sure to just touch on that information and also just some of the resources that we've been coming across here at River Network as we've been planning how we're going to support Get Out the Vote this year in the general election. So we wanted to share those with you. So Brenna, if you could go to the next slide, please. So as organizations, River Network and organizations like Amigos Bravos and Alabama Rivers Alliance, we have an opportunity to not only share important election information with our audiences and our supporters, but also provide information and resources to the groups that we work with so that they can get the word out to their supporters and audiences too. So if we can go to the next slide, Brenna, and launch. We have a couple of polls that we wanted to launch just to get a sense for those of you who are on the call today, what your plans are for Get Out the Vote. So the first question is, do you plan to help get out the vote in 2020 at your organization? So we'll give folks just a few seconds here to answer that poll. All right. Looks like we're good. And it looks like everyone is saying pretty much, we're not sure because we have a lot on our plates and we have limited capacity and are going to need some support if we're able to add another thing to our plate, which I totally get. And that's the boat that we're in at River Network too. And so I wanted to just share with those of you on the call today what we come up with that may be helpful to you to sort of meet that need with as little effort that as possible, using the resources and things that are out there already at hand for us. So the next question is very similar that we wanted to ask. And if that was, if you could launch that one, Brenna, is if you're planning on helping groups in your state get out the vote in 2020. We'll give everybody just a few seconds. All right, I think everybody's weighed in, and that one is the same thing, not sure, we have limited capacity, and would be really helpful if we had some resources, support, and et cetera to make it as easy as possible. So Brenna, if you could move to that slide right there. So I want to take a second before I dive in and just ask you all to take a second, and I know the text here is very tiny, so it may be difficult to read, but to take a look at this email. And I got this email just this morning from the organization in my state where I live, North Carolina. So this is from the North Carolina Conservation Network. And Brittany sent me an email that said, that asked me to let her know what my voting plans are for this year, and that many people are what many people are telling her that they're planning on doing, and then saying that there's no wrong way to vote this year, that they're just recommending everyone vote as early as possible. So if everybody could take themselves off mute, I'd love to just hear a few reactions of what stands out to you about this email, what you think is interesting, helpful, insightful about this email that I got from Brittany this morning.
Well, it's good that they stress the nonpartisan component and basically the last two sentences, right? That they're recommending call the nonpartisan voter helpline, and also saying that there's no wrong way to vote. Yep. Which we all have our individual opinions about, of course. But.
Exactly. Anything else that stands out to folks?
I like the visual, and that it does emphasize that you can vote in person, because in a way we've been talking so much about voting by mail. The other day I was like, can I still vote in person? I had that moment and I was like, are they still doing it? And so I think that was good. But.
Yeah, and that's one of the things that I'll touch on that I've researched that I'll share with y'all here in just a second too, because that's a question a lot of people have. Anything else that stands out to folks?
I appreciate they talk about voting early, because that's one of the things that I think is important. If you are voting by mail in particular, to be sure you don't wait till the last minute to turn it in.
Yep.
And it was really interesting. I couldn't figure out what those were pictures of from where, because it's really small. And I finally figured out what it was, but I'm sure if you had it in an email, it might be
more visible. It is. And I apologize for the size. And one of the other things that I thought was really good about this email and their strategy here was that by asking me to let them know what my voting plans are, it actually forces me to like pause for a second and be like, oh yeah, I haven't figured that out yet. I haven't figured out what my strategy is. Am I gonna vote by mail, or am I gonna vote early, or am I gonna wait till election day? And so it's also a prompt to encourage their folks to start thinking about, what is my plan for voting this year? And then she goes on to tell everybody what her plan is. So that gives folks like a little bit more information to be like, oh, okay, so that's what Brittany's thinking. That helps me think about what my decision might be. All right, so let's move on to the next slide, please, Brenna. So I'm just going to run through really quickly just some of the things that we're thinking about at River Network that we'll do, and then share some of the resources that are available to you that can help you get information to people in your state about voting in this election season. So the first thing is just reminding people to register to vote and verify that they are registered to vote if they think they are. So checking your registration status, vote.org has and Brenda's going to upload a resource sheet into the chat that has all of these links in it so that you all will have this as a reference. But vote.org has a place on their website that you can enter in your information, and it'll tell you whether or not you're registered to vote. And if you could go to the next slide, please. The other thing that vote.org has is a form that you can embed in your website that allows people to check if they're registered to vote via your website. So you can plug this form into your website if you want to. Next slide, please. And then it's exactly the same thing for if people need to register to vote. They also, vote.org has an easy way for people to enter their information and register to vote. And then if you go to the next slide, please, there's also, again, a form that they have that you can embed in your website that allows people to register to vote on your website as well. All right, so the next slide is the other thing that we can do is remind people when the deadlines are to register to vote in our state. So I live in North Carolina, and I found this from a website called headcount.org. And again, this link and information is in that resource sheet that Brenna has uploaded, that North Carolina deadline to register to vote is October 9th. But in North Carolina, if you miss that registration deadline, you can also register to vote if you go to in-person early voting. And I was able, if you could go to the next slide, please. I got all of that information about North Carolina again on the headcount.org website. They have state by state information on there that gives you all this information for where you are. Next slide, please. And then just a few other things to keep in mind for this election season is that September 1st is Vote for Clean Water Day. That's being organized by a couple of different coalitions, including the Choose Clean Water Coalition and the Coalition for the Delaware River Watershed. And then I think there's several other coalitions that are joining in with them. So you all are also welcome on September 1st to use that as an opportunity to remind people to register to vote and just other information about the upcoming election season. And then National Voter Registration Day is September 22nd. And included in that resource sheet that Brenna uploaded into the chat, there's also a link to a civic engagement toolkit that Choose Clean Water and the Delaware River Watershed Coalition put together that has sample social media posts. So if you just want something that you can copy and paste, they've got that. They've got sample email messages, they've got images, and all kinds of other information and resources. So that's another good tool that could be helpful. All right, so the next slide, please. The other thing that we're looking at River Network doing to just support our audiences is getting information out there about in-person early voting. Again, this is just sort of a sample I put together for where I live in North Carolina, that you can vote in person here from October 15th to the 31st, and a link to where you can look up where you can go vote early here. If we go to the next slide, again, at headcount.org, they have information for each state about what the early voting and absentee voting options are in your states. And then the next slide, the other thing that we're looking at here is just getting information out about how and where to vote on election day, and links to where to find your polling place and get just the general information about what time the polls are open. All right, so then the next slide, again, Headcount has all of that information state by state. So it's sort of right there, and you can link up to it and get that information to folks. And then if we go to the next slide, the final thing that I wanted to run through, since this is sort of new territory for most people this year, is navigating how to vote from home or absentee vote. So some of the things that we can do to help our audiences navigate that as well is sharing links on where and how to request a vote from home ballot. And if you go to the next slide, please, there's actually vote.org has a place on their website that you can send people. And again, they also have a form that you can plug into your website if you want to provide that to your folks. And then on the next slide, the next piece of that I think is important that we're thinking about is voting from home is kind of a two-step process. You've got to request your ballot, then you've got to receive your ballot, then you've got to fill out your ballot, and then you've got to send it back in. And you've got to do all of that by certain deadlines, both of those things by certain deadlines. So just helping clarify what that process is in your state. And if you go to the next slide, please, Brenna. The other thing that's important is that every state has some different rules about absentee voting. So, and including if you're allowed to do it or not. And so again, headcount.org has specific information for each state about what the rules and regulations are for how to vote from home in your state. So that's another good resource. The next slide is just some additional info that just sort of highlights like how much information there really can be to communicate to folks about how to properly cast and check on your absentee ballot. And if you go to the next slide, again, this is just gives you an example of everything that Headcount will tell you about what's going on in your state. So I just found that super helpful. And then the next slide is the final one that I have, is something that you mentioned, KB, and that I am seeing, and I know for me, it was a question that I had, was if I request an absentee ballot and they send me one, but then I decide I want to go vote in person, either at early voting or on election day, like, can I still? And so this website, usa.gov, has some general guidance that's typical, but then they also have a link to your state or local election office that can give you more information about what you need to do if you request an absentee ballot and then change your mind and want to vote in person instead. So that's some additional information that you may want to look into for your state and help share out